Hello everybody and welcome back to the Galactic Armory. My name is Aaron and it's just me today. Lately I feel like I haven't had a lot of time to work on props myself. Lately it's been Jamie working on most of the things and me and him just doing voiceover together. So I told him I wanted a project that I could just do myself, my own pace, from start to finish, and that's what we're going to be doing today. It feels really good to start working on props again. You don't realize how much you've missed it until you start working on one again. Lately, life has been absolutely crazy with all the changes going on here at the Galactic Armory, all the changes going on at home with new baby, but carving out some time to work on this project was very rewarding and much needed. So I thought I would do a bit of a solo tutorial and just a chill talk about how much we love prop making. This helmet is what I'm calling the Imperial Mandalorian Commando. We're going to be starting with raw 3D prints and working this helmet all the way to the finished one you see before you. There's a lot to cover in this tutorial, so let's get started. So we're starting with the raw 3D prints. Now I printed these in PLA on the Bamboo Lab Carbon X1 printer. And there's a lot of details on this helmet, including some recessed lines on the face that we want to be careful with when filling in the 3D printer lines. That's why I'm using the Bondo thinned out with acetone approach first. We're aiming for a mixture of around 3 parts Bondo to 1 part acetone. You don't need a whole lot to get it to be thinned out, but we're going to be using this slurry all around the helmet, save for a few parts. There are some keyed areas on the ears and on the mouth that we don't want to fill in because we don't want to interfere with the fitting of any parts. I'm going to be using the old-fashioned approach of just using my finger and some straight Bondo for some of those spots with thicker layer lines like on the top and bottom side of the helmet. Once that Bondo is hardened after a few hours, we're going to jump into sanding. Now because the Bondo and acetone mixture is so thin, I'm able to jump to hand sanding pretty much right away. And I'm starting off with a higher grit sandpaper compared to my usual 120 or 80 grit sandpaper. Here I'm using a 220 right out of the gate. That's because the thinned out Bondo is laid so thinly, it doesn't take a lot of effort or grit to sand it down smooth. I gotta say, I know a lot of people love to trash talk sanding, but after not doing it for months and months, I actually had a pretty good time with it. It's very relaxing. You get to just sit there in your own thoughts and do something simple, and you get to make pretty easy, consistent, good progress, which really makes the brain feel good. Once we have the first pass of Bondo sanded, I'm going to be using some Rust-Oleum 2-in-1 filler to fill in a lot of those very tiny scratch marks or any remaining 3D print lines. I use about 2 coats at this stage. You don't have to go too overboard because there's still a bit of sanding left to do, but it helps to identify any trouble spots needing additional Bondo or filler. We're just going to keep repeating those processes, sanding, Bondo, sanding, filler, until we're happy with the overall smoothness of the helmet. Now from what we saw of these guys in the Mandalorian, they have a glossy helmet. And glossy helmets are usually very challenging. It can be very difficult to get a nice uniform gloss, but that's what we're going to be trying to get here today. Now, a big part of getting a uniform gloss coat is surface preparation. We've already kind of began that process with filling out the 3D printer lines, but now we need to take it a step further. I'm going to be sanding down the helmet again, but this time doing it under running water with 400 grit sandpaper. This 400 grit sandpaper is going to make it a lot smoother, but we're not quite done. I want to apply a black base coat primer just to make sure that there are no other spots needing filled or sanded. Before we apply that primer, I want to rinse off the helmet and wash it off with soap and water. The soap and water part is important because after sanding, there's still a lot of dust collected on the helmet, and you want to use soap and water and a sponge or a towel or something to make sure that your surface is totally clean. Otherwise, that dust will interfere with your paint and subsequently your gloss. I put the black primer on, but realized there was still a few spots to clean up. So after that, we take it through the wet sand again. Jamie here sanded the helmet up to 800 grit sandpaper, and this wet sanding technique really elevates the smoothness of the helmet. I like to say that dry sanding up to like 300 grit is about the texture of a piece of printer paper, but wet sanding up to 800 or 1000 grit brings the helmet to almost a glass-like smoothness, which, like I said before, is very important for a gloss coat. Once the helmet is fully sanded, smoothed out, and ready for painting, we're going to be hitting the entire thing with some flat white primer. Not only is it most of the helmet color, but it also makes sure that we have a good base coat for all of the other colors going on later. I'm going to be using a flat gray primer for the gray parts of the helmet, and a flat black primer for the black parts of the helmet. Funny enough, all of the helmet colors on this helmet were different primer colors that we had on hand. Now, if that wasn't the case, you want to avoid using gloss paints right away. We want the entire helmet to be matte before we apply our gloss on. That way the glosses don't interfere with each other and gloss paints can take a very long time to cure and fully dry before other paint can be laid on top of them. It is very important for a gloss helmet that you wait the appropriate dry times between different colors, and especially between your colors and the gloss. Once I have all the parts painted up, it's time to fully assemble the helmet now. To do that, I'm just going to be using some CA glue and a little bit of CA activator. I'm also going to be gluing some magnets into the neck seal area. The fun thing about this helmet is that the front neck seal is actually removable so that you can actually get your head in, but then pop the neck seal on after the helmet is on your head. I actually had a little bit of a reaction between the CA glue activator and the gray primer underneath. I haven't had a problem like that before, but it's something to be aware of. I might have just sprayed it too closely or used too much activator. I'm not exactly sure, but it's something to keep in mind for yourself. And remember, the activator is not required, it just helps speed up the process. After waiting a couple days for the paint to fully dry, we need to make sure that our surface again is clean of any dust or debris or fingerprints, because I've been getting my greasy mitts all over this helmet thus far, is clean. So we're going to be using some more paper towels and soap to clean off the entire helmet, and we're going to let it air dry in a nice closed off area, free from dust or floating air particulates. I let mine sit to dry overnight, and you definitely want to wait at least a few hours. Because if the surface is wet or damp, that will definitely interfere with the gloss. Speaking of gloss, it is time for us to lay down our first coat. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I am usually terrified of doing glosses. You can very easily go overboard with them, and I wasn't using a very high quality gloss. I'm using Rust-Oleum Glossy Clear, mostly because I didn't want to crack open a can of 2K clear coat just for this helmet. While applying the gloss on this helmet, I did do a pretty good job of not getting any runs, but there was a small run on the front part of the face. I think I applied too much in just a certain area, and it kind of pooled up around the angles of the helmet and drooped forward. Now at this point I was panicking a little bit because runs are definitely recoverable, but it's just a lot of work to get that helmet back smooth. So I tried to pat it off with a paper towel to maybe lift up some of that gloss, and that just made it worse. If you see a run in your helmet while you're glossing, just leave it alone. When I tried to dab it off with a paper towel, it actually kind of smudged the paint underneath the gloss, and you're better off just waiting for the gloss to cure and then maybe sanding it back down. While glossing, it's usually best to first start with a light dust coat, wait about 10 minutes, and then do your heavy coat where it actually shines. Now I might just be making stuff up here, but I feel like the dust coat definitely helps the shiny gloss coat stick onto place and stick on the surface so that you don't get those runs. When doing your heavy coat, you want to do overlapping sprays, but definitely don't go too far or apply too much in one area at once. Luckily for me, my run that I tried to wipe off didn't really affect the finished helmet too much once the gloss had dried. We've got some final touches to the helmet now. We're going to be using a Hobart face shield for the visor insert, tracing along the outside perimeter of the included visor template. I'm going to be cutting it out with some tin snips, trimming a little bit here and there, trying to fit the visor in place where it's just right. An important thing to note is that I waited probably 5 days between this step and the gloss, just so that glossy coat had more than enough time to fully cure. If you try and handle it too soon, you'll end up leaving thumbprints or fingerprints in the surface, or you risk just completely smudging the entire gloss. So definitely gloss it and then wait several days before even considering working it again. Well guys, that is how I made my Imperial Mandalorian Commando helmet. Working on glossy helmets isn't my favorite because there's a lot of surface prep involved. A lot can go wrong. Plus, you don't really get to do any of that fun weathering. But I really love these guys' helmet in The Mandalorian, and so it was a great helmet project for me to work on. It really helped de-stress me to just carve out 20 minutes to either sand or paint it a little bit throughout the day. And I think a lot of you guys that do this can agree that just making movie props and making helmets like this is just fun to do. And not only fun, it's very therapeutic. Like I said at the beginning, life has been pretty stressful these days, and I don't get to work on props as much as I used to. Lately, I've been leaving it up to the professionals, but it felt good to pick up the sandpaper once more and work this helmet from start to finish. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something. I hope you take some time to think about what prop making means to you as an individual. For me, it's a great way to express creativity while also just spending some alone time with yourself, with your thoughts, and clearing your head. Plus, by the end of it, you have an awesome looking helmet for you to display somewhere, and I just think that's awesome. Anyway, I'll stop rambling. Thank you all again for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video.